Hey, welcome to Integrative Preparedness. How are you all today? You notice that there are two lamps lit behind me. You all know what that means. Those were made and sent to me by Hondo Bob, one of our highly esteemed patrons on the Patreon channel. And he just put a long, detailed comment over there on, I think, yesterday's video about the meaning of the one if by land, two if by sea. If you're not with us on Patreon, you ought to be. And for those of you who already are, make sure you go over and read Hondo's post on that. And don't forget to check the community section. That is, we have some amazingly brilliant people over there posting stuff that you want to know. Today, I'm going to talk about starvation, how it leads to slavery. You know what's going on with the food supply, not just in the United States, but around the world. You may have heard what they're going to start feeding cattle and pigs. I won't get into that here because it's one of those things that might get, things, the powers don't like us talking about those things, okay? So I'm going to talk around that, not through it. But the danger of starvation is a real one. I just put up one over on the Patreon channel, speaking of that, about urban warfare and an urban warfare situation that happened and with which I was personally familiar in Belfast and what is improperly called Northern Ireland. It's an important lesson. So again, those of you who are already patrons over there, you'll want to listen to that, and there will be more coming. Books. Before we get into starvation, and actually I'm going to be reading out of one of my books on this. Things have exploded, for crying out loud. I'm going to spend the whole rest of the day signing, autographing books, and taking them up and shipping out for those who don't know what's going on. It's the Stonemont series, my series of books, everything you need to know about how to prepare for, how to survive, and how to rebuild after a total collapse. If I made videos for the next 20 years, I wouldn't be able to explain everything that I've already explained in detail in this series of books. They're available on Amazon in either paperback or Kindle, and the link is down there, always is down there. However, they are now available directly from me on our website, stonemont.us, stonemont.us, not .com, .us, because I like .us. And we now are taking orders on the website, whereas before people that wanted autographed copies had to write a check, go to the post office, send me a check. And I loved getting the letters and the notes and the patches also that way. But now you can do it through the website. And ever since the website got up just last week, I mean, it has exploded. I've run out of books twice. I've run out. So now, after I get done with this, I've got to put in another large order for books. I got to make the orders larger, I guess. Thank you all. I'm glad so many of you like these things. And remember that anybody who orders the full set from me, all 6 books, I'm going to throw in a free copy of the Stonemont notebook along with it. I love this. I use this all the time. Mine, people are loving it. And that's going to be from me to you for getting the whole series. So that's the link to that's down there too, stonemont.us. Those of you who have read the books have read this part in my very first book, The Reversion. And it starts on the 3rd chapter. I've had some people ask me when they read this, when they read this series, they say, well, I just can't do that. I don't have all that money, and I want to remind people, this was all about a normal family, not a rich family, a normal but prepared family who, as a result of their preparedness, were able to help other people who came to them, and a community built up around that, which allowed them to do very well in the downtime. And yes, this is the way I suggest you do it, everything in here. And some people have asked, I've had some questions over on the Patreon site, because that lets you send me messages, saying, well, I had one question, I'm 79 years old, I don't have much, I don't have any, what am I going to do? to get ready? There are answers for that, and I'll be answering that over there. We have too much to talk about today. In the third, so this is Stonemont is the home of the Wyatt family, the patriarch of which is Jim. And this is about 2 days after the EMP or CME. You have to read 2 books before you find out what it is. 2 days after everything shut down. Okay, so we begin with him. We're going to start with this, and then I'm going to go over and I'm going to tell you the story of Joseph that many of you don't know. You all know the story of Joseph and the famine in Egypt, right? Most people think that that's a story of preparedness. It's not. You'll hear people say Joseph was the first prepper. Joseph prepared for the government. Did you know that? It's a story, it is a story of government preparedness and the slavery of the entire population, and that's where we're going with this. First, I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from his. Jim Wyatt shut off the tractor and looked back at the area he had just tilled. Now, they live outside the city, just a few miles, not way out, just a few miles out the city where they moved from the suburbs. Jim Wyatt shut off the tractor and looked back at the area he had just tilled. About 4 acres, it quadrupled the space of his existing garden, which was now beginning to sprout its many rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini, corn, beets, beans, potatoes, carrots, and melons. Until 3 days ago, it had been more than enough to satisfy the needs of his family, supplemented with meat and dairy products from the grocery store and their freezers. Now, without commercial supply chain to rely on, he knew they would have to grow a lot more, not only for their immediate needs, but to can for later and to use for trade. It was still early enough to get in a second crop, which meant they would have fresh vegetables from June through the first frost in October. Excuse me. Now sometimes getting into November. And more to set up his stores. Plus the apple, peach, plum, and cherry trees. By the way, I said in one that I made earlier for prepping for prosperity, my plum trees, my apple trees, my peach trees, and my pear trees are all blossoming now. So that's what's happening with him. The apple, peach, plum, and cherry trees he had planted several years ago were starting to show good fruit. He hoped that would be enough, as he didn't want to deplete the food bunker stock if he could help it. Looking around the property, he figured he could add another 20 acres of food production in the future, but this patch was about all he'd be able to get in right away. Okay, so the first thing he knew, as soon as it happened, he started developing more food production. That's what you want to do. We have some dangerous times coming ahead. They could involve food shortages, and when food shortages grow up, they become famine. Okay? That means starvation of people. I've written about starvation. I've written about cannibalism, and starvation leads to slavery. I've written about slavery, and we're getting into more of that in the 7th book that I'm writing right now. But let me take you to the Bible and tell you the part of Joseph's story that many people don't know. I'm going to read, I don't usually read the Bible on here. That's for Stonemont Church. But I'm going to read this. If you remember, because most people don't know this part of the story, and it is the warning for people. Most of the people remember Joseph was sold into a caravan into slavery into Egypt because his brothers were jealous of him, and he was kind of a smart aleck, to be honest. He was always a one-up on him and telling his brothers that he was a favorite because his coat of many colors and all that, So he kind of, you can say he brought it on himself, but it was all God's will. He ended up in Egypt, got thrown in prison down there because Potiphar's wife put the moves on him and he rejected her. And so she, said, well, I'm going to tell my husband that you put the moves on me and he's going to throw you in prison. And that did happen. So the Pharaoh had a couple of dreams and couldn't figure them out. They called for Joseph through a whole long litany. I won't take the time. Joseph was able, with God's direction, to tell him what the dreams meant. And it meant there was going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine or of shortage. Okay. So now, so Pharaoh appointed Joseph to oversee the preparation for Egypt. Okay. And Egypt said, we want, bring in a portion of all the grain from all through Egypt to store in the storehouses. Whose storehouses? Was it the people's storehouses? No, it was Pharaoh's storehouses. Okay, I won't go through the whole thing. I've done an entire sermon on this, I think, over at the Stone Mountain Church channel. And so we're going to go, and I'm not going to talk about how his brothers and his dad came down and got food from him. Let's talk about this. Meanwhile, so Joseph's been put in charge of all of the taking care of the famine, right? Meanwhile, the famine became worse and worse, and the crops continued to fail. By the way, I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. It's easier for people to understand than the King James, and in many cases, it gets the meaning better. Okay. Meanwhile, the famine became worse and worse, and the crops continued to fail throughout Egypt and Canaan. Joseph collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan in exchange for grain. Who did he collect the money from? The people, right? He collected all of the money. Listen to this. He collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan from all the people in exchange for grain, and he brought the money where? To Pharaoh's treasure house. He got all the money from all of the people and put it into the government treasury. Is this different than the story that you learned in, Sunday school as a kid? When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, so did Pharaoh's FEMA go out there and say, hey, we got all this, we collected all this grain for just such a time as this. So you all come down to the camp here and we'll give you your gruel. No, he didn't do that. He sold it to them. Why? We're going to see. When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, they came to Joseph crying again for food. Our money is gone, they said, but give us bread. Why should we die? Well then, Joseph replied. Remember, everybody thinks Joseph was the good guy, right? Keep listening. Well then, Joseph replied, since your money is gone, give me your livestock. I will give you food in exchange. What's their livestock? That's their only remaining source of food, right? So they gave their livestock to Joseph in exchange for food. If you want to read this yourself, this is in the 47th chapter of Genesis. So they gave their livestock to Joseph in exchange for food. Soon all the horses, flocks, herds, and donkeys of Egypt were in Pharaoh's possession. In whose possession? In the government's possession. But at least they were able to purchase food for that year. The next year came again and said, our money is gone, and our livestock are yours. We have nothing left but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us. Make us your slaves. Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We will then become servants, slaves, to Pharaoh. Just give us grain so that our lives may be saved, and so the land will not become empty and desolate. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold him their fields because the famine was so severe, and their land then belonged to Pharaoh. Then all the people of Egypt became slaves to Pharaoh. Do you see the parallel? I'm sure you do. With everything going on in our world, it's almost too much to keep track of, let alone handle, let alone prepare for. With what's been happening with our food supply, with things that we now are only now learning is going to be happening to our food supply, and we don't know that it hasn't already happened. Probably has. with everything that's happened, this is the road we're on. Total control of the food supply by the powers. The only way to ensure that you can survive is to be a producer, a full producer of your own food. That's where we got back to the third chapter of the reversion. What did he immediately do? Started tilling more ground. Well, the total collapse hasn't come yet. But if we see it coming down the road, like 3 years before the Egyptians finally sold themselves and their children into slavery just for food, if we can see that, we ought to take that seriously. You ought to take that seriously. Probably the most important thing right now is to increase your ability to live outside that external mass of interlocking systems over which you have little or no control. No control, actually. You need to stock food, and then you need to aggressively develop every bit of food producing that you can. I was out starting new seeds today. My fruit trees are coming in. No matter how much I did last year, I want to do more this year. No matter how much I do this year, I will want to do more next year if we're still in the situation that we're in now. And by that, I don't mean in case even if the situation betters itself, because I fully expect it to get worse. You all know what I'm talking about. You need to increase your ability to be self-reliant. The danger is real. The danger is coming. If you don't have food, if you aren't able to produce the food you need, you're at the absolute mercy of those who can provide it to you. Who out there is ready to sell themselves into slavery for something to eat? Who out there is ready to sell their children into slavery for something to eat? You think it can't happen? It's been happening for thousands of years. It'll happen again. It's happening all around the world right now. There's nothing to say that it can't happen here. And if things keep going the way they are, it very well may. And you should plan on it, because that's all a part of what we say. We prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. But turning a blind eye and refusing to accept a very real possibility is ensuring that you will have no way to escape whatever those who are more powerful have planned for you. Okay? That's it. Remember, the books are now on the website, stonemont.us. You'll hear a little bit about Stonemont. Matter of fact, to bring this to a conclusion for people who may not, on the back here, it tells of the notebook, tells you a little bit, what in the world is Stonemont? I'll just take our closing bit here and tell you about it. Stonemont is a world apart from the collapsing world surrounding it and the crumbling society that has devolved to the point where celebrity is valued over ability, corruption is tolerated while character is attacked, and death is promoted over life. At Stonemont, a literary, virtual, and real-world community, the foundation of faith, family, and friends supports the ideals on which our country was based, but from which it has strayed. Stonemonters share these values and find within the pages of the Stonemont series, remember? Whoops, they're getting heavy. Or my hands are getting smaller. Find within the pages of the Stonemont series a world they prefer to the decadent and crumbling world around them. It is a world of personal responsibility, worship of God, dedication to family, contribution to community, compassion for and assistance to others, and a celebration of the human spirit. That's what that is. And if you want to know how to do it, again, I make no apologies to keep plugging these, because these are going to help you more than anything, the Stone Mount series. Remember that we prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. The possibilities of what's coming down the road are getting more and more dire. That means that our efforts to prepare need to be more and more aggressive. You all have a good day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.